How can you do all that needs done in life and still pursue your desire to learn French or the guitar or grow a plant or make art? You can't put a fiddle under your pillow and wake up playing it. Though how cool would that be? But one thing we can do, no matter how chaotic and overwhelming life can be, is know that every tiny small motion in the direction of those endeavors really do matter. And not only that, they add up over time with great momentum. Join me, Fain, as I interview painters and gardeners, designers and musicians, photographers and cooks, creative livers of any kind, who have somehow, in the middle of it all, continued on their creative paths, no matter what. This is Fain House Radio, and I'm so glad you're here.
My name is Jessica Kaufman. I'm really proud to say that I have a master's in crafts education, which is a bizarre degree to have. And it's kind of a made up degree, but I made it up and I worked really hard with my faculty advisors to come up with a curriculum that actually sort of targets what I want to do. And so I'm really proud of that next to my name gets to be some initials and it gets to say Master of Crafts Education. So I guess I would say like my major creative pursuit so far, if you could take the average over all the years, would be teaching folks to do what I love to do. Some things I teach and I've got decades of experience in, and then some things I end up teaching where I'm like, well, I just started doing this, but here, I'll show you how to do it. And that's both both of those things fill me with love and everything in between. And so I would say that passing it on has been the major pursuit of my creative life. And also, I have to admit, commodifying, monetizing my hobbies has always been a theme in my life since I was a little kid. I just like to make things and sell them. And that was always, I don't know why. So our last name was given to us at Ellis Island when my grandparents immigrated in from Poland, Ukraine, Russia, that area. The borders kept changing. And when they came through Ellis Island, they ditched our Polish last name and they gave us a German last name. And it means merchant. Kaufman means merchant. And so I'm just like, I don't know. It was I didn't ask for this identity. It was given to me. And now I gotta live up to it. But one of my favorite facts about me is that in high school, I made all my spending money by making hemp necklaces, doing macrame. And I had a clipboard where I would take people's orders and I would custom make them, like they could choose the beads. And I had a pricing scheme on how many beads I put on their macrame. And then I would go to class and class was like my time to make them. And then I would go get the money after class and be like, here you go. And I had a lot of report cards that were like, we only ever see the top of her head, because I was just furiously like hamster making macrame. My life hasn't changed that much, honestly.
Sometimes I do think we're kind of born how we are. And that's a good example, because some people just like to make things. They're just sitting by a fire knitting. It's fun that for you, you've always known that you have like this businessy side that's exciting for you. And it's wrapped up in the creative side. They're like meshed together.
They are. As much as I don't love that identity all the time, but I'm in my 40s now. So I'm sick of being apologetic for the things that just come naturally to me. And I'm like, it's not like I'm making a ton of money off of it. I'm not screwing anyone over, but I don't think I will be that type of person who just sits and just makes to make. Like I'm either going to teach it or I'm going to sell it or I'm going to sell teaching it or some combination, but never say never, right? Because I'm only halfway through this life, I think, knock on wood. And there may be a phase of my life where I'm like, I don't care about any of that. Just going to sit by a fire by myself and make and never show anybody.
I mean, I think when you stop and think about it, the business side has a lot of creativity in it. How you share your story, even your price structure, the people you connect with, like, ooh, maybe I could teach at this place, and you cold call or whatever. There's so much in there.
Yeah.
And it's really exciting. And for me, that's kind of an exciting motivation. It's not necessarily like money focused. It's more about, ooh, how do I make something out of nothing for my work?
Exactly. It's all outreach. Like if someone else was selling it for me and I was just making the money, all the joy would be lost for me. It's outreach, whether it's teaching or selling or both. It's like, hey, I made a thing. Check it out. And you can too.
You clearly loved making things as a kid. Was it because your parents made things or your grandparents? Like who taught you to knit and why do you think it actually stuck?
I'm so happy that you asked that question. Well, my mom taught me to knit, but it didn't stick. She was taught erroneously that because she's a left-handed person, she had to knit backwards. So literally someone taught her to like reverse, do the knit stitch in reverse and read patterns in reverse. And it was so much extra work that like I had an interest and she had an interest in teaching me, but she herself was stuck and stymied and frustrated. And that really came through. And so I dropped it. I was like, no, that's not fun. But when I went to college, there are these two beautiful artistic women who sort of floated around my dorm in knit socks. And I targeted them one snowy weekend. And I was like, I want to do that. I'm coming to your room. I'm bringing this super crappy acrylic yarn and these terrible needles, and bless their hearts, they taught me as best they could how to knit socks. And I was twisting all my stitches and I didn't know for years, but I fell in love. So if that's kind of typical, I think, to go from nothing to like, I'm going to do something really hard.
Once you fell in love with it at that time, did you seek out some more intense classes or mentorships?
No, I kind of just did. I started making up my own patterns right away and sort of inventing how to do, like, I remember trying to invent how to do a thumb on a muffin, on a muffin. On a muffin. I knit these thumbs for muffins. It was amazing. No, on a mitten. Yeah. I promise I've had breakfast already.
I want to see a thumb on a muffin.
We could do that. And, I'm so glad that was I didn't go seek out more experts or more classes at that point. I was sort of fiercely independent, like, I don't need patterns. I'll make it up myself. As I've tempered with age, that has served me instead of hindered me, but it certainly hindered me a lot in my early life of like, I don't need to learn from the experts. I've been doing this 5 minutes. I got it. I think I've really actually pissed off a lot of mentors that way, to be real. Yeah. So I just sort of made up my own stuff and nothing fit well. I remember in college, I had this Welsh boyfriend. And so I went to Wales for Christmas one year and I crocheted his sister a scarf. And for whatever reason, started crocheting the length first, but didn't understand how long the chain would turn into. And so I brought this 20-foot scarf, ridiculous, and like tried to pass it off as it being on purpose. And it wasn't until I was like 25 that I was living in Vermont and I took a class at the yarn store in Montpelier. In 20 minutes, the instructor was like, you're twisting your stitches, your tension's way too tight, do this instead. And then it was like, everything just broke through.
It's really fun thinking about how that fierce independent learning is so important. And at the same time, I had a similar experience. I was trying all by myself to learn book arts. And then I went for 2 months for a concentration with Anne-Marie Kennedy and Julie Leonard at Penland.
Oh,
and
wow.
It just blew my mind. And in that 2 months, it was just like a couple of years of being in school. I mean, it was just amazing. And I realized one day they're showing me so many things and so many tips and tricks and in honor of the history and all these things. They're also like saved me hours of my life. For real, learn for real. So hopefully it's a good mix to have the independent learning part mixed with like, go find some people that are really, really good at this and really
absolutely
like be with them and hear what they have to say. And then they can pass on their 40 years of knowledge, to you.
Exactly. I think as young makers, we're still in that developmental part of our brain where we are rejecting and pushing away elders, and that's developmentally appropriate, I think, for the adolescent brain to be like, no, I'm going to do it by myself. But then it's essential to not waste those opportunities where, those people probably saved you years of your life and so much money and experimentation and materials wasted. And yeah. And speaking of, I forgot to say, so, my mom was an amazing sewist, or is it still an amazing sewist? So she sewed a lot of clothes for us when we were little and then sort of dabbled in needle arts. But the main craft influence on my life was my great uncle, Norm Schulman, who was quite a famous 20th century ceramic artist. And he and his wife, my Aunt Gloria, moved to Penland in the late 70s, early 80s. They have had a house and a workshop there, since I was a little bitty baby. And so going to Penland, not as a student, but as a community member, as a visitor, and as the relative of Norm, and this is I'm drinking out of a Norm mug for those who are watching the video, just to witness someone in my family building a life of craft and watching him and his approach to life and all the aspects when it came to like building your career and teaching and where are you going to move next and learning institutions versus teaching independently and just a mix and what that looks like decade after decade. And I still visit that house as often as I can. Norm isn't alive anymore, but Glow is very much alive and we hang out often. And her house is just filled with work that people have made over the last 70, 80 years.
And so you had it modeled in your life that you could successfully live as a craftsperson and have a cozy house and still pay your bills and be in community with other artists. And I think it's really great to have it modeled around us. It helps us think, okay, maybe this is possible.
That's what I want to pass on to my students. Like, you remember when I was teaching high school and I brought my students to the folk school several times to sort of illustrate exactly that. If this is a passion of yours, you can build this life. Like, no, you're not going to have the retirement account and the benefits and all the, the security and the comfort that comes from working for someone else. But there are things that you can build for yourself that you can't find anywhere else, really, unless you're working for Google or something. But I don't know. My experience has been mostly steeped in adults being self-employed and working in the arts. My parents are both self-employed musicians, and that's what they did as I was growing up. So I never expected like a real high-paying life. I just want to live within my means and make work. So
you're smiling so far. You have a big smile.
Yeah. I also I will say, for people who are like, oh, maybe I could turn this passion into a full-time business. I don't sleep very well. I'm full of a lot of anxiety. My to-do list is overwhelming constantly, just a deluge of to-do things, and balls get dropped left and right. And now I have people counting on me for their income as well. And so my little idea needs to succeed, or it won't, whatever. Like, that's what I'm trying to say. Like, businesses close all the time. If the business part of my life doesn't succeed, I will still be a maker and a craftsperson and an artist and a teacher, and I'll just do it in some other way.
It's not an easy path. It's not like you're just in your studio painting all the time or working on your work all the time. There's so much that goes into this.
Hardly ever, actually. Yeah, it's amazing. I will say at Waxon, I make 10% of our products these days. I have an amazing staff who have really taken to it and who are artistic in their own right. And I've trained them. And now the work is shifting. The body of work that we are constantly creating, it's all clothing and home goods, but it really has shifted to reflect the aesthetic of the people who are working for me and who get to really step into their own role of like, this is what I want to see. I'm going to try this.
I did want to say, for anybody who does sign up for the email list and they get to go on into the private Facebook group and see the video, that before we move on from the knitting part of the conversation, they have got to see your sweater.
Thanks.
It has a yoke, kind of a mustard and red, and it's so patterned. It's very, very nice. So well done.
Thank you so much. Half of this yarn is from the Green Mountain Spinnery in Vermont, which is a place that is very close to my heart. And then half of it is from a local spinner here. And this, the dark maroon color, a friend of mine overdyed the red so that I could have a third color. I'm so grateful we're talking about knitting in this hour, because I don't get to knit hardly ever at all. The businesses, they eat my life and they eat my time, and I hardly ever get to knit anymore. So I'm really proud to be wearing something that I made back when I had a little more time.
I think when I first met you, you were knitting and knitting and knitting.
Well, my first attempt at being self-employed was Happy Go Crafty when I was living in New York City. So I was a self-employed teaching artist, primarily in knitting. And I still have a website, and there's over 80 free instructional videos. I don't make any money from them. They're just out there. And that kind of just sits in space waiting for me to come back to it. I'm glad you remember that version of me.
Yeah, totally. You're talking about your parents having been musicians. I also know of you as a singer. Yeah. Tell us about how singing came about for you, how it's different for you than your making life.
Thank you. Yeah, you're reminding me of all these parts of myself that I really love, that I've lost touch with a lot over the past, 6 years. Waxon is 6 years old now. And it's okay. I think that everything in our lives kind of ebb and flows, right? We're into this, we're into that. We've got time for this. We don't have time for that. But yeah, so both of my parents are musicians, more in the jazz and big band standards of the day. They were performing musicians for money. And then my dad did a lot of recording stuff and a lot of composing, but they were musicians on the road for 10 years before they had kids. So they traveled around in the 70s in a van in their sequin disco outfits that my mom sewed for them in the back of the van. Yeah, sometimes they had a quartet, sometimes they had a duo, but they played, weddings, bar mitzvahs. They would have short-term, like 6 months in this city where they were the house band and like a nightclub kind of thing. Being musical was always like, we sang harmonies in the car growing up and everything, but it was never folk music. I didn't hear Appalachian music or shape note music or anything until I was in my early 20s, really. I mean, we didn't even listen to Bob Dylan. Like, we listened to the Beatles, we listened to Earth, Wind and Fire, we listened to Quincy Jones. So I had a lot more like a citified musician life, I think. And then actually I was at Leaf Festival and I heard, I'm going to say, just the most haunting harmonies. I don't know if I knew at that time to be like, oh, listen to those stark, haunting open fifths with a lot of dissonance and like these, but it was Susanna Park and Georgia Rose, her sister. I remember feeling pulled across the lawn, and they were my age. I was just like, what are you singing? And I bought their CD. And that was shortly before I met my husband. I was married for a little while to someone whose parents founded Northern Harmony. As soon as I took up with him, I started singing all kinds of polyphonic a cappella folk music with Village Harmony and Northern Harmony. And that's what I was doing living in Vermont. That is still a tiny little part of my life. In fact, I'm going with them to the Republic of Georgia this coming summer to sing Georgian folk music and learn some dances and stuff. So yeah, my singing life really changed. It went from jazz and musical theater to more just being absolutely in love with, I'd say, old time music and mountain music and shape note music. And I love anything in a minor key with crunchy harmonies. And I don't consider myself a lead singer at all. I think my voice is best when blended with others. And so my favorite type of music is just to sing with others, sitting around someone's living room or porch. And I do have a class on the folk school calendar coming up where I'm teaching a weekend of rounds. As a high school teacher and I've been an elementary school teacher as well. Rounds are just a super easy entry point to getting a group to sing. And I've been collecting them.
And they also have really high impact when people finally learn the words and everybody's singing and overlapping in the harmonies and things. And then they themselves are like, wow, that feels so good. So I think they're powerful that way.
It gives them a key, an entry point into like, this is what harmony singing feels like, but I don't have to think about harmonies. I'm just going to sing my part and hold on to my own while they start. And I just love it. I was driving back from cross country skiing 2 nights ago with 2 friends in the car, and we were singing rounds as we were driving back. So it's just a fun thing to do with the people around you.
I was wondering, even though you just said you don't usually just go solo, but I was wondering if you would sing one for us.
I might as well. Sure. Yeah. A song I've been thinking about a lot lately in the New England, in the sort of the Vermont song circle. We had a really important person pass away in the past couple months, Larry Gordon, who has founded Village Harmony and Northern Harmony. I was very involved with Bread and Puppet and a lot of other just super sort of world changing groups of artists and people up there. He died in November, and I've been thinking a lot more about shape note music and sort of the lessons that Larry taught me. So yeah, there's a song, the poetry is by Isaac Watts. And, he wrote a lot of the poetry, the lyrics that were set to shape note songs in like the 1700s. The title of the song is Pisgah, but because I'm singing it by myself and not with a group of other people, I'm going to sing a line of it or a couple lines of it that Emily Miller recorded with her mom, Val Mindell, and they call it When I Can Read My Titles Clear. Their album is magical, by the way. If everyone listening to this can go to Spotify or Apple Music or whatever and look up Emily Miller and Val Mindell, you're in for a treat. So I'm doing nothing new. I'm just copying Emily, who's a friend of mine. And I'm so honored to know her and to love her band, the Sweetback Sisters. Just so many talented people in my life. I just want to be a sponge. I don't exactly know where I'm pitching this, but I'll go. When I can read my titles clear to mansions in the sky, I'll bid farewell to every fear and wipe my weeping eye. So that's as much of that as I'll share. And then if you want a little round too, there's one that I just learned from my friend Nicole Singer, and it's very short. And I'd love to get it stuck in your listeners' heads. Is that okay?
Yeah.
This is a 2-line round, and it's so easy. And it goes, time exists so that everything doesn't happen all at once. Space exists so that everything doesn't happen to you. And that's the whole round. And so people just come in, time exists so that time exists so that, and it just keeps going. And it's just the charmingest thing. I love it so much.
You have talked about Waxon a couple of times. It's one of your businesses. I was lucky enough to get to visit you for a split minute the other day and see the back rooms and see the front rooms. And it's really impressive. You have a storefront. All the work's really beautiful. You know, it was just great to see where you are on the other side of Instagram, you know, to be there in live. Tell us a little bit about Waxon. I also wanted you to explain the difference between tie-dyeing and ice dyeing.
So, you know that I attempted to be a self-employed artist while living in Brooklyn and freshly divorced and super broke. That was my knitting career. I came back to North Carolina and I taught at this amazing high school for a few years. And then I got the urge again to try to be self-employed, be my own boss. And, you know, there's a lot of benefits. It's a hard path, but there were some things that really called to me about that. Anyway, so I thought, okay, I'm not going to start a business in knitting. I've already tried that. It's too hard. I know the pitfalls. And I had worked at this incredible summer camp for 16 years in Brevard called Gwynn Valley. And I sort of rose through the ranks of the craft program and got to lead sort of the messy crafts, I would say. Tie-dye, batik, candle making. And I ran that program for like 10 years. And so I thought, you know, I already have a business model. It's the crafts cabin at camp. And I think if I can put my own spin on that and turn it into a place where people can come in and take classes and make their own, I say it's like a paint your own pottery studio, but for dyeing fabric. So short classes, they're like an hour or two. And we have 4 core classes, which is tie-dye, ice dye, batik, and shibori. But yeah, so that was the idea, is that it would be like a big open space with all these little tables. People could come in and just grab a bottle and make their own. But then what I realized is people really need a lot more instruction than that. So now we have a couple different revenue streams, which is not a phrase I knew before I started Waxon. I've learned a lot of business speak. We make our own line of clothing. Some of it is like cut, sewn, and dyed by us. So we're literally making the clothes and then dyeing it to order. Some of it is upcycling, where we go to thrift stores and we find really great fabrics that are just an ugly color or have a stain, and then we dye them and make them a one-of-a-kind wearable piece of art. Some of it we buy blanks, you know, just like a box of white t-shirts. We try to do sustainably sourced and like well-made, no sweatshop stuff. And then, you know, we'll dye multiple things at a time, so people have multiple choices to look through. And then we teach classes, we sell kits, and I also teach online. I have this online school, and that is Waxon, not in a nutshell, but in a big coconut shell. That's a lot. I don't really have an elevator pitch for it because it's just grown and changed so much. But the amazing thing is that, you know, a couple of years ago, I did decide to have a brick and mortar store. And so now we're open to the public and people can walk in and kind of either they're attracted because they already know, you know, fabric dyeing techniques, they know what batik is, or they have no idea that these things could even be made by hand. They don't know the difference between sprayed on color and hand dyed color. We teach them just by existing. Let's talk about that, because I didn't address what is the difference between ice dye and tie dye. So we work with fiber reactive dyes, which I love. I know there's a lot of people doing plant dyes and natural dyes, and that I totally respect that world. And I'm not working in that world. I love fiber reactive dyes because they are so instantly accessible to learners of every level. I can send things home with people and they can wash it out. It's a cold process dye, so we don't have to worry about stoves or heat or any of that. And it's super color fast for years and years and years and years and years. So they're not going to take home something and have it fade. They don't have to hand wash. It's just like easy access dyes. And it's what I used at summer camp to teach hundreds of little kids how to tie dye every summer for like 16 years of my life. So it's a product that I'm like, yeah, it's synthetic, but it's really low on the toxicity scale and it's super safe, you know, to wash out in septic systems and city water systems. But anyway, it's a powdered dye, right? And so for years, what I was doing is I was mixing these dyes with water to create tie dye, which is direct application where you mix it into a squeezy bottle and squirt it on your garment, or immersion dye where you mix it into a bucket and you stuff it in shibori. Then, and I did not invent this, someone else did, maybe 10 years ago now, someone figured out that you can sprinkle these dry dyes over ice cubes. And if your shirt is underneath and the ice cubes are on top, essentially you are mixing the dyes with water, but frozen water that is melting one molecule at a time. And so if you think of a color like, there's a color called midnight blue, which is a super deep dark, it's halfway blue and halfway purple. When you think about all the component colors that goes into midnight blue, you've got some pinks, you've got some reds, you've got some blues, you might even have some browns in there to darken it up. Every single one of those colors gets to hit the fabric at a different time because the ice is melting slowly. And so ice dye is more of a watercolor look. It has these floral bursts and these sort of gasoline puddle spreads, and it's tie-dye is like coloring with markers, and ice dye is like watercolor. For a lot of our customers, I'd say like 90% of the things that we sell are ice dyed because that is the look that we like the best. There's such a thing as like neon rainbow spiral tie-dye, and that's not my look. I don't wear that. It's not my demographic. We are going for more of like a hand painted garment kind of look. And that's what ice cubes let us do. And snow, actually, I'm writing a blog post right now, which is one of the thousands of things you have to do to keep your business relevant online. Write a blog post and then maximize it for SEO potential and get your keywords in the right place and your headings in the right place. That's a whole job. But I'm writing one about snow dyeing, which I couldn't write until we had some snow on the ground. But blog posts take about 6 months to gain traction online. And so it really is going to be, we're seeing hits on that for next winter, I think. And that's the first thing I've dyed in so long because I needed pictures for the blog post. So I actually got to do a little bit of dyeing, but mostly my staff does it.
And sometimes it's like we need an assignment and then we go do the thing. And don't you think also what's so appealing about the ice dyeing is that there's like this accidental randomness that you can't control. And it's so visually appealing because it's not like the human hand made everything happen. It was like, you had to step back and see where it landed.
It's a craft where you are releasing control of the outcome to your materials. You're saying, all right, ice, you're going to do what you're going to do. And dye powder, you're going to do what you're going to do, just depending on the day, you know, how your hand was shaking as you distributed the powders or the type of ice you're using. Maybe Ingles is out of the chunky ice, but they've only got the flaky ice. And then the garment looks completely different. And so that has been one of my sort of like major objectives in my craft teaching career, is to sort of help others cure themselves of this perfectionism of, I know exactly how it's going to come out and I can take steps to manipulate my final product so it looks exactly like I envisioned at the beginning. No way for ice dye. No way. we have some hopes and we have some goals, but it's been really fun to sort of educate people and be like, you can stay open to whatever this is going to look like at the end. And I promise it's going to look cool, but don't get bent out of shape if it's not what you pictured. In fact, embrace that.
It makes me think of going into a restaurant in France and it's a set menu. So you don't get to pick and, you know, you're not like picking it apart.
Right.
Onions, you know, you sit and you let the artist who's the chef hand you your plate and you accept what's there. And it's such a sweet, different way to be.
I agree. Yeah. You're trusting the artist to say like, I know how to do this. I think you're going to like the outcome. As a beginner too, ice dye makes that really accessible. I will say one of the smartest things I've ever done is create kits. And so now people can, that's like our best seller. When I was first taking a business class at Mountain BizWorks, they said, you know, don't make your money $5 at a time. Like that's not a good business model. But ironically, that's kind of what keeps us afloat is these little prepared ice dye packets. They're $6 each, or you can get them in a kit, which is $20, you know, so we're not talking about high price points, but we sell 3 or 4 every day and they get good results and they help people access this world of dyeing that otherwise you would have to buy a bunch of stuff and figure it out on your own.
Yeah. And in large quantities instead of smaller quantities and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with some good bread and butter. That's your bread and butter item.
I love bread and I love butter. And we love making our kits. And it gives my younger employees, and like we had an intern from Asheville High. It was like, you're going to sit down and you're going to do production folding and filling and shaking and labeling. And like, that's a big part of running your own craft business, is all those little mindless tasks that you have to, you know, whatever you're doing, you got to put labels on packaging or something. And it's not always, I'm an artiste and I'm making things every day. Like, in fact, it's rarely that.
In the middle of it all, what is filling your inspiration cup these days?
That is such a great question. You know, I think my answer is a little bit depressing, but I don't want to be fake. I'm not feeling super inspired right now, unfortunately. And that's something that I think is going to be able to change as the business structure changes, where I'm like, I'm not working a shift right now. Like I'm filling in for my employees when they're sick or when someone's snowed in, but I'm not on the regular calendar. And that's giving me a little more space in my life, which hopefully means inspiration will come back. Honestly, what's inspiring me is completely different crafts. Like I have these 20-minute love affairs on Instagram with like, a quilter's work or a willow basket maker. And just the idea that there are other things out there. I've been so steeped in fabric dyeing for 6 years now. Well, plus the 16 before when I was doing it as a summer job. I'm ready to think about other crafts, even though I know I don't have that much time to do them. That is really filling me of being like, oh yeah, there's other parts of me that can be explored when I have time.
And it's refreshing for you because it's only tiny bits that's fitting in your day. But, if it gives you that sweet feeling.
Exactly. I think this is a lesson in patience for me, choosing this to do, to run a business and to try to make it work. And that's not, it's not something I knew I was getting into. I couldn't picture, you don't know what you don't know when you start a business. And it's really teaching me long form patience.
Well, kind of in honor of that, do you have any last words of encouragement for anybody out there? Not even necessarily as a business, but just, sometimes we feel suffocated under the mountain of things to do in life. Just words of encouragement to just not give up on your creative path.
Yeah, a couple of things that I've sort of been leaning into lately of like, I'm going to say this, but I'm really saying it to myself, is that the thing that's keeping you awake right now, the thing that feels like it's going to crush you if you can't get it done, and how are you going to get it done? And I don't know if you can relate, but I have those things, right? Where I wake up thinking like, oh my God, we've got this giant order, but I don't have the fabric, and like, oh, where are we going to get it from? Oh my God, I'm going to fail. I try to remember what that thing was from 6 months ago that I was so worried about. That's a non-issue right now. And I can't even remember what it was. So it's like, maybe this too shall pass, and all feelings change, good and bad. So if I'm really stressed and freaked out and worried one day, like, don't take that too seriously, because chances are in the next couple of days, I'm going to feel like it's all good. And so, yeah, maybe feelings aren't facts. That might be some good advice. And like, just think really seriously before you decide to monetize a hobby. That can be addictive. I know this very well. Like, this is what third business now that I've started. I haven't even talked about my fleece outerwear business, but that's less craft, I think, and more just apparel. But yeah, that's like, it's okay to keep some things just for you. You don't have to make money on everything. In fact, you might love it more and it might serve you better and be more special if you don't try to monetize it. Trying to get some ideas of what that could be for me, something that I never ever teach and I never ever sell, and I just do it purely for the love.
Well, I can't wait to see what it is.
Same.
If you would like to be in touch, email me at afainhouse@gmail.com. I also hope that you're inspired to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. If you would like to watch these interviews in video form and are curious about the happenings of my little business called Fain House, where I paint and make art prints and gift cards from my watercolor originals, I'd love for you to sign up for my email list. When you do, you get a coupon for 10% off a one-time purchase in my Etsy shop and first dibs on my annual limited edition calendar printing. You will also be granted access to our free private Facebook group, which is the one spot you can watch these interviews. If this all sounds fun to you, go to your web browser and type bit.ly/Fainhouse to sign up. This is not a weekly newsletter, but rather a list of folks who are interested in hearing from me time to time. You can find this link, as well as links for each person I interview, in the show notes of each episode. I'm Annie Fain Barrelon. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll leave you with a quote for the day. Everyone who's ever taken a shower has had an idea. It's the person who gets out of the shower, dries off, and does something about it who makes a difference. Nolan Bushnell.